It's a great to be going to know and discuss a very important topic today. We are going to speak about the importance of psychology in politics and how politics is using psychology in real life. Dr. Bob Sinclair, could you please introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
Hi, Bob Sinclair. I was a tenured professor of psychology. Now I do consulting work. I also do work looking at COVID-19.
And so let's dive into our topic today. How do you see the relationship between psychology and politics?
Well, there's an entire field of political psychology, and it's really a sub-discipline of social psychology, and it involves taking social psychological principles and applying them in the area of politics. So, for example, issues having to do with attitude formation and change. Now, what's interesting is in this extremely political world that we have right now, sometimes people are making what I consider to be dramatic mistakes. Now, and actually, I'm glad, it turns out I'm really happy about the people who have been making those mistakes. For example, Trump has been making those mistakes. And the worst thing that could happen, in my opinion, to the world is having him reelected. So, for example, in psychology, there are these things called assimilation and contrast effects. And generally what happens is if things fit into your schema, that they fit into your kind of belief system about a person, then information that's consistent with it will get assimilated into your view or opinion of that person or that political figure. But if it's so dramatically different, okay, then you get a contrast effect. And so when Trump was saying things like, oh, Biden's feeble and Biden can't complete a sentence and Biden, Biden's got dementia. Well, that set up a beautiful contrast effect for Biden. I mean, he could just come out and say a complete sentence and people are going to say, this is far different than what Trump set him up to be, right? And certainly Biden has shown that, right? And then you have the kinds of things that are going on now where I'm not sure who's Trump's controllers are, but whoever they are, they can't control him, or they've just given up, or they're just very bad at political psychology. So his attacks on Fauci about, the pandemic, and I'm not sure if in Egypt you're aware of how bad things are in the United States. Okay, they're at about 690 deaths per million people. Okay, I mean, in Egypt, you're really low. I haven't even done the numbers lately, you're so low. And, you've got places like Thailand where it's like, 1 death per million people. And Canada's not doing particularly well either. I mean, we're sitting at close to 250 deaths per million. Brazil is awful. It's at over 700. You've got Fauci, Dr. Fauci in the US, who is, he made some mistakes at the beginning. So, for example, saying that, he wasn't sure whether masks were going to help or not, but that was a long time ago. So Fauci's been leading everything, and he's probably the most trusted person in the United States right now. So in the last couple of days, Trump has been spending his time attacking Fauci. And now if this guy's the most trusted guy in the United States, attacking him is only going to backfire, right? It's going to make you look bad. And so the only thing it can do is build up in Trump's base. But anybody who hasn't decided yet or is independent is going to look at this and say, this is crazy. And you're going to get a big contrast between Fauci and Trump. And Trump's going to look like he's insane, and Fauci's going to look like he's trying to save the United States. So political psychology basically applies. You know, when we talked about consumer behavior issues and those sorts of things, you can just replace everything I said in there with a political figure, okay? You're trying to sell a political position. Yesterday, I saw on television what I consider to be probably the most effective political ad that I've ever seen. And of course, it's psychologists, social psychologists, and political psychologists who are helping design these ads, and market researchers, and you know, they kind of get together and do these sorts of things. So Cindy McCain, who is John McCain's widow, came out and endorsed Biden. Now, of course, John McCain was a Republican, but he was a Republican from when the Republican Party actually stood for something. You know, people had a lot of respect for John McCain because he would cross the aisle, and Biden would do the same thing. So, and then you had Trump doing things like criticizing members of the military, and saying that they were losers, and then saying that you know, John McCain was a loser because he was captured in Vietnam and these sorts of things. Well, Cindy McCain came out, and this ad is fantastic because it's got a lot of photos of McCain and Biden together, and shaking hands and arms around each other. And she said, you know, Biden stands for America, just like John. Is the end of the ad, but in it she says, you know, Joe and John would argue across the aisle, and then they'd go out for lunch together. And they were great friends, and they both want a better America. And Joe's going to do it just like John. And that's the end of the ad. Well, you know, for anybody who's got any patriotism, real patriotism, that's the kind of thing that you want to see in a divided America. So this is a good time to discuss these kinds of issues. I'm not sure how closely people in your area are following the American election, but given that they border with Canada, you know, I follow it pretty closely. And also given that, you know, in the grand scheme of the world, Canada is really meaningless. There's like 38 million of us spread out in the second largest, the country with the second largest area in the entire world. And most of it is frozen. This is a good time to be watching the tricks and techniques that are being used. Now, you know, Trump is playing to his base by trying to get it, and you know, obviously there's somebody in there who's instructing him to do this, to play up these big conspiracy theories, okay? Like QAnon, which the FBI has labeled as a domestic terrorist group, okay? Trump will not denounce them. And he says things, well, like I don't really know what they are, but I hear they're against pedophilia. I said, well, everybody's against pedophilia except for pedophiles, right? I mean, this is like a really stupid argument. And again, that plays to his base, because his base is going to assimilate everything that Trump says, but and anything that isn't consistent with their beliefs about what Trump says, they're just going to discount. Whereas people that actually think are going to listen to this and say, this is insane, you know, that Democrats are a satanic cult that's running a pedophile ring out of a pizza parlor and Comet Pizza in Washington D.C. Like, no sane person is going to believe that, right? Or nobody with an IQ of over 80 is going to believe it anyway. So this is going to be an interesting couple of weeks.
Okay, so you've mentioned that the ad campaign was successful and was psychologically well built.
I don't know if it was successful. I'm just saying that, to me, it looked like it was probably the most effective political ad campaign or advertisement I've ever seen. I was very impressed by it.
What are the
you can pull it up on YouTube somewhere.
Sure. What are the psychological principles used for this ad?
Well, for that ad, it's what they're doing is trying to show that there are similarities between the real Republicans and the real Democrats that can bring the country together rather than tearing it apart. And Trump has torn it apart. And so it's basically it's a soulful plea for unity, for getting back to reality in the United States, because right now the country is so divided. Trump would not denounce neo-Nazis, really. He kind of did, but when you say in Charlottesville, there were good people on both sides. Look, I've never met a neo-Nazi that I've liked. It's just, not that I've met that many neo-Nazis, but these are people who are white nationalists, Christians. They're still lynching. Occasionally they lynch people of color. It's happened to Blacks and Hispanics in the United States, and they're responsible for more domestic terror. That the Trump administration wants to make it look like, oh, we've got to fear Al-Qaeda, we've got to fear Muslims, we got to fear this, we got to fear that. No, what you have to fear is the people who are living in the United States, and they're white nationalist Christians, and they're the ones that are the domestic terrorists. They tried to they set up a coup to try and kidnap and kill the governor of Michigan, and Trump didn't even denounce that. This is a problem. This is the divisiveness that's going on in the United States. So this whole ad was an appeal, and it's an appeal to getting back to normal. And we'd like to live in a world that's normal. And right now, our world isn't normal. It's even worse in the United States, because aside from COVID-19, they've got this absolute, insanity going on politically. So that appeal to getting back to kind of basics and back to a real system and back to something that works and people collaborating with one another, rather than people being at odds with one another all the time, I believe is appealing.
So my other question is, like, the voters for the administration will go and vote again. What kind of psychology is driving them?
Well, I mean, he's got this base that believes everything that he says, okay? Now, they believe that there's a cabal out there that is opposed to him and opposed to American values and promoting all sorts of garbage. And it doesn't exist. It's fiction that Trump has made up and the Trump administration has made up and fed into. It's very difficult to change the minds of either zealots or conspiracy theorists, okay? There's just no point in arguing with them because you're not going to get anywhere. So Trump's feeding to this group of people, but they're not big enough to get him reelected. And last time it was an experiment, is that some people thought, yeah, it might be a change to have a politician who was a business guy, and it turns out he wasn't really a good business guy. But, you know, well, it turned out to be a failed experiment. And now the people that are in the middle are not going to, you know, they're not going to, the people that are the independents in the US, they're the ones who aren't aligned with any political party and they swing one way or another. They're going to listen to this stuff and it's going to make them dislike Trump even more, because nobody who thinks can actually, you know, pay attention to these messages. And, you know, remember we talked about the difference between when you're talking about persuasion, the only time that strength of message is important is when people are motivated to pay attention to the message. But if somebody presents a message that's so absolutely ludicrous, I mean, it can just be a soundbite and you go, what? And then you're going to pay attention to it. And this is all going to backfire on Trump. This like coming down on Fauci stuff is going to backfire. Or that's my prediction. I want to see, I was looking last night online for data to see if actually Fauci's popularity had increased since Trump was attacking him. I don't know. I didn't find the data. They're not out there yet. They might be today.
My other question is, how would psychology help Biden to build a stronger picture and persona than Trump?
I don't think Biden's interested in that. I think what Biden's interested in is getting the work of the government done. And see, Trump was interested in making himself look like he was powerful and important. And it's unclear right now whether he's broken a lot of laws. I know that the Southern District of New York wants to arrest him as soon as he's out of office. This might be one of the reasons that he said, well, we might just leave the country if I'm not reelected. See, he's protected by his position as president for being prosecuted for certain kinds of crimes. Okay, like if he killed somebody, you know, that would be different. He'd be prosecuted for that. But for financial issues, now it also looks like there seems to be some evidence that, you know, his family has been making a great deal of money because of their association with the presidency. So his daughter, Ivanka, has a clothing line. And, you know, I think that it's being produced in China. Yeah, you know, in some reasons, in some manners, I kind of think that all of these people are corrupt. But I think that Biden's interested in doing things like, let's get back into the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Trump got out of, so that there is some ability to control China from dominating the world economy. Let's get back into the Paris Climate Accord so that we can do something about the environment. Let's mend fences between the Republicans and the Democrats so we actually get something done. Because if you look over the last 4 years, Trump really didn't get very much done. His tax bill benefited the real rich. It didn't do much for the middle class at all. It didn't do anything for the poor particularly. You could argue that he did have, and it wasn't, was there really an effect in the Middle East or not? Okay, with 2 other countries recognizing Israel. I mean, you guys have recognized Israel for what, 20 years or something, okay? So you got 2 more countries that recognize Israel. I don't know if that's a big deal or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. You live in that area. Is it a big deal? So those are 2 things that Trump got done. And I can't really name anything else. He messed around with NAFTA, with Mexico and Canada for a long time. And this new trade deal that we have, it's it's kind of hard to tell what went on there. And then he does things like slap tariffs on Canada anyway. So I look at this and say, well, no, he really didn't do anything. Like Obama had his problems too, okay? But Obama wasn't out there trying to make himself look like he was God. And Trump is, and he's not. There's a contrast. There's God, Trump. So I don't think that Biden is going to be like that at all. I think Biden wants to get back to basics and get the country back on track. Try and get this divisiveness between the different people of different skin color. I don't like using the term race because we're all the same human race. It's people of different skin color. Trump's always been motivated to grandstand. He's done it all his life. He's lied all his life. Biden, not so much. And Biden has changed over the years too. And it's pretty obvious that he's changed. You can look at policies that he supported 20 years ago versus policies he's supporting now. Times change. And you got to be absolutely certain that there are a lot of social psychologists and political psychologists who are in the back room working on Biden's campaign, and they're already working on what do you do when Trump tries to argue that the election was unfair if he loses, which he's going to do. is if he loses, he's going to say this election was unfair and I want to take it to the Supreme Court, which is what happened with Bush v. Gore in 2000. And that's why he wants to get the Supreme Court justice, conservative justice, through right away. Or at least that's my opinion. So these people are working on a strategy of how do you actually convince the people that, in fact, yes, indeed, the election was legitimate, right? Because you don't want, a third of the country thinking that the election was an illegitimate election. So there are psychologists working in the back rooms with these people to develop these strategies and say, well, and they're testing them too. It's not like they just come up with them off the top of their head. They develop them, but then they do little experiments to see, oh, this works better than this, right? So that's applied psychology at its best. And this is an important situation, because I think the world's in for a rough ride if Trump is reelected.
So my other question here, like if we not Trump or not Biden. But if someone has a good quality, he doesn't usually try or aspire to show that quality and grandstand about it. Uh, Whether at the same time, someone who does not have that good quality or the quality that we think is morally acceptable, he tries to prove to the people that he has that quality. Why do like good people give up on showing their own abilities?
Well, they may be humble. They may be too humble. Is sometimes you need to speak out to be heard. It's the old that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Well, you want the person who's actually got the most reasonable moral values to be the squeaky wheel who says, no, this is what we should be doing. You don't want the person who's faking, okay? And that's what Trump did at the beginning, was fake. He said he was going to make America great again, and he made America weak. And so you want honest people, and you want people who are. You have to have thick skin if you're going to go into politics. So if you've got somebody who's got thin skin but has really, good beliefs, maybe they should be working behind the scenes to help promote a candidate who has the same value system but has thicker skin, because you're not going to survive in politics with that thin skin.
Sure, sure. What else would you like to say today?
Well, I don't have much more to say. I just like to say, everybody keep safe out there, keep wearing your masks, try and physical distance, wash your hands. We got to wait for a vaccine until we're going to be out of the water on this one. But I think it's, as far as they tell me on television, it's coming. But don't get too complacent in terms of coronavirus and COVID-19, because complacency makes you, when they start reopening things, it makes you believe that things are safer than they really are. So everybody out there, please be safe.
It has been outstanding talking to you, Professor Sinclair, as usual. Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure.